Hello, and welcome back to the UAS Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I'm joined by Gray Byers, Chief Business Officer at Thread. Welcome to the podcast, Gray.
Thanks, Danielle. Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you. We're happy to have you. So let's start by having you tell us a bit about yourself and Thread as a company.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, my name's Gray Byers, and I head up our commercialization efforts on the Thread side. So I oversee kind of our product all the way through customer acquisition and setup, operations in the company. And yeah, I have a heavy background in asset management, particular to utilities, and many years in corporate innovation, where I worked extensively on implementing technologies into changing the way that operations and asset management is done in general. And within that framework, I ran across what was Airtonomy at the time, now Thread, and came over to join a mission, I should say, that we all believed in. And really what it's about is trying to transform the way that drones and robotics are embedded into enterprises, and how can we make, these things into a tool and integrate it in a way that data is actually made useful, and the drones and robotics are actually made scalable. So we do that from end to end, where we integrate with different forms of drones and robotics to do both the data acquisition side from an automation perspective, all the way through the data handling and landing that in the lap of whoever needs to make use of it most. So that's really our mission here is how do we make the technology most approachable and make these programs scalable.
Great. So could you tell us a bit more about asset inspection, more specifically the importance of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, tap into my previous life here that I've brought over, but inspection's always been a really big part of asset management in general. And, particularly as we see the infrastructure that we, utilize every day, you and I and everybody else listening to this has, a great need to rely on critical infrastructure to have society function. And, in this country, we have an issue with aging infrastructure, certainly, but also the pressures that are going to be required to advance, particularly the grid, and how the grid is going to have to adapt to different ways users or consumers use energy, how energy is produced differently, certainly the carbon transition and all the things that will necessitate a different asset management framework. And therein kind of lies the problem is how do you manage assets best and keep them running reliably for the least amount of money. So there's lots that go into that. Inspection is a pretty key piece in how to state the current condition or make decisions about a piece of infrastructure or an asset. And that gets into the company side, but also how does that company best serve their customers? And really that, is furthered, I think, by a transition in a few different areas, which certainly drones and robotics are a key new piece to how inspection can be done better. But with it becomes a digitization problem. So, going from, employees of a company going out and kind of taking some semblance of record of what could be considered somewhat of a subjective view of how an asset is in what state it's in and what we should do about it, to making more of a true record and true standardization through the use of superior technology. So that's been a good transition to see. I think it's early, but really the criticality of that information for operators to run assets and systems correctly is a needed transition to be able to make those choices and really in a cost-effective way grow our infrastructure while still maintaining the residual infrastructure needed to keep things going.
Absolutely. So in the drone and robotics sectors, what are some challenges that are often affiliated with asset inspections?
Yeah, so I think probably I would break this down to two categories: scalability and usability. So there's not many solutions out there that, at least our opinion, our view, and most of our subject matter experts' practical experience tells us that there's not a real scalable solution from an enterprise perspective out there. There's a lot of issues with getting an operation to go collect data up, period. There's also flaws in the way that data is collected and approached. So is there the ability to do, asset collection or information collection via robotics across your entire fleet? that's a big operational problem, right? And so the ease of use and approachability of the technology is certainly one aspect. But even if you do get a scaled program, there becomes, an overwhelming data problem that is maybe even harder than the implementation in the first place. And that's really the whole goal here, is to make use of that data, right? And use it well. How do we create insights off of inspections that can be used to make asset decisions, is really what we see here as the end approach. So with that in mind, I think having the ability to better approach the data acquisition problem, as well as handle the data velocities of how much information overload is going to be required to make sense of in order to make these programs integrated and scalable and make the data useful, I think is where our approach really comes into play, and how we differentiate from the market, in order to make that a possibility.
Awesome. Could you delve a little bit more into how Thread's approach is different?
Yeah, absolutely. So we so traditionally in the market on the automation side, in terms of how the data is collected, you're going to see two pretty discrete paradigms. You're going to see waypoint missions, which is essentially hard coding off of a 3D model or off of a map layer that says drone go here, and that sort of backs into taking an image of that particular asset. Or you're going to see collecting a ton of imagery on a particular asset and then making a mesh model of it, which is basically a 3D model that shows you what that asset kind of looks like in real life, but from a bunch of imagery. And so that's sort of collect a bunch of imagery and make a 3D model so we can throw away the image that's not useful. And the other method is every asset and every mission sort of has to be curated. Well, on the collection side, we take what we call a rules-based approach. So we distill assets down more to their representative parts and what is the geometry of that asset and where are things of interest located. And from there, we can do what's called rules-based and say, well, I only need a picture of this, this, and this, which begs, well, why take a picture of the whole structure when you just need a handful of pictures? So that's really our approach to automation, is how can we template these assets, which makes them very easy to scale across an asset fleet, because we can put in a minimal amount of information, use our computer vision algorithms, as well as our flight stack that we have that's sitting on top of the drone in particular, and automate those missions to where anybody, including you and I, with minimal training, can do professional grade asset inspections. And that's really the key here, is how can we transition that drone into a tool where it is truly push button and is truly in the field with a user that is already on site. So no more services, no more bringing third parties on. How do we get professional grade inspections by the folks that are already there and know the assets best? So that's really our approach on how we automate and how we make these pieces of technology more towards tool than discrete operation, is a big differentiator in the data acquisition side. Now, like I said in my previous comments, the data acquisition side is one challenge, which namely operational and a quality problem, but it creates a data problem of how do we pipe data back into a company that might be managing, tens of or hundreds of different types of assets and thousands of instances of them. And really from our perspective, what we've done is we've combined the automation technique with an asset-centric, system. So it's not about missions. It's not about, how you go collect the data. It's about the asset. And we really translate robotic information into an asset language, which is the language that these companies speak, because they manage these assets day to day. All their systems are set up surrounding these assets. And so what we do is we create all the transformations to associate that data, which we call context. How do we make the data contextual to an asset and make it useful to that particular enterprise for what and how they talk about that particular asset and make use of that data? So that's one key piece, is lowering the barrier to entry from acquiring data, making it useful in relationship to how their data models already work to talk about these things we're taking pictures of, and then move that data seamlessly into the enterprise where it's stored, inventoried, and made useful at its face without any third parties. It lands useful. And then from there, we really make use of a variety of different aspects to help users make workflows, to spread the data around. How can we collaborate and make use of data across many different personas of an enterprise, all from the same collection action without any data handling? So what's the least amount of time we can touch that data from the point of acquisition all the way to where a decision is made and a work order is issued? And that's really the basis of our Unity platform that kind of connects this end to end, is the platform sitting on the thread, which is our company brand, which the namesake being really that connection, that all the way from the point of that image being taken to someone making use, really where that concept comes from. And it all kind of flows through this Unity platform.
Interesting. I know we covered the basis of the Unity platform. Would you mind telling us a bit more about Thread's Unity platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, like I said, there's a lot of different components that connect together to make what I'm describing possible. And so, we get all the way into the edge devices, you might call it. So the robotics themselves, the compute going on the edge, all the things that are helping the automation and data handling happen within the drone or robot. And that, has obviously, software stacks in and of itself, but it also flows through, and the data needs to move into the cloud, and the cloud is where that data is stored and represented against an asset, but also where back office folks, from an engineering and planning and other types of decision makers that are trying to figure out what to do about the assets, that's where they perform workflows that take the data, make use of it, and then go do some sort of action, whether it be to go fix something, monitor something. And really Unity is designed to be the underpinning of that process. How do you create massive amounts of flows of data from drone and robotic inspections on assets and make it organized and useful to a variety of people across an enterprise? And what we've really focused on doing is building tooling. So we have chosen not to build a purpose-built app. So most you'll see in the industry, the apps are extremely specific, but we think there's incredible commonality between the different use cases, and certainly all asset and asset inspection frameworks are pretty much along the same lines on the flight side, on the way the data moves, on the way it's made use of. And so what we've really done is we've created a platform that has the tooling underneath that creates the applications more than we build the applications themselves. And as we get more mature and we build out to more use cases, those capabilities that are base in the platform will only improve and mature with it, where we can more rapidly deploy. So that connectivity between collection of data through automations or otherwise, moving the data, storing the data, creating workflows, making the data accessible to advanced analytics, making it accessible to a variety of people, making choice off of it, declaring that a work order needs to be made. All those aspects can be containerized. And really what we want to do is make a open piece of ecosystem that creates somewhat of a data standard that allows predictable data and governable data to flow off of drones in a scalable way. But also, how can you make that data available to whatever is best in class? We know we're not going to compete at some of the advanced analytics and machine learning activities going on in a variety of industries. And we don't think we should be the best at everything. We think that whoever is the best at something should be brought into an ecosystem that delivers the best, result for that particular user for that particular problem. But it has to be from a starting point, which is a standard that we know how to access the data, how to move the data, and the enterprise knows how to flow it back and forth. And that's really what we're creating through Unity, is the repeatability, the extensibility, and really how do we bring together an end-to-end that can be embedded into an enterprise and cobble together all the best in breed to make the greatest outcome for insights to make decisions on assets for that enterprise.
Great. So shifting gears just a little bit, earlier this year, Thread was awarded $1.2 million under the Air Force Small Business Innovation Research Program to develop UAS solutions at the Grand Forks Air Force Base. Can you tell us more about what this project entails?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really exciting development for us. We have really enjoyed the relationship with the Air Force Base there. I think we found, early on that there's a lot of alignment with our methodology and approach. Kind of the differentiators I talked about and the rules-based approach is pretty perfect for a base environment where you want the drone to do a lot of things, but you also want it not to do a lot of things. And that's really the power of where our onboard software comes into play and how we can enforce rule sets and create essentially a container to work within. So go look at that thing very specifically, but also don't do all these things that we don't want for whatever reason. And that applies, to an Air Force base, to an industrial environment. You can imagine how that is similar across the board, both in the private sector, commercial space, and the military alike. But for this in particular, we, like I said, our goal here is to make the technology very approachable. How can we get folks in their normal everyday job using a drone embedded into their life with ease? And that really gets down to how easy you can make push button automation that does desired inspections. And so for this in particular, we're doing perimeter security, which is how can we ensure the continuity of the base, decrease the rounds required to kind of walk it, but also make the ability to use a drone a little more accessible and a little more predictable by leveraging our existing rules-based approach to, go inspect the fence line, as well as disallow the drone from doing things that are, it can be not looking in certain areas. It could not being in certain areas. It's whatever rule set is required for that particular base or scenario we can apply to the software where it disallows the drone from behaving in that way, which is a really key point to this. It's how can drones be scaled where an operation's a base is a very dynamic environment. There's a lot of issue and risk to getting a bunch of drones up in the air, even though they're useful. There's an operational constraint, and I think it shows some great progressiveness to the Grand Forks Air Force Base and how we can kind of work together to prove out what is an incremental step to where all these drones can be stationed. So as you kind of hear what I'm saying, we're sort of a stepping stone to understand, eventually drone in the box or whatever akin to it you want to describe. That's the future clearly. But there's a technological and regulatory constraint to get there. And we think a great interim step is how can we equip users, employees or service people in this case, with the drone, and make that a very easy operation to start to grow and advance and expand the program where multiple operations, many different kinds are happening at once and happening predictably, where, but there's, a lot that goes into making sure that's well done in concert, as well as, like I said, all the integrations and data utilization and not causing more problems than you're solving. And so that's really what we want to prove out is how can we apply an approach that's more global to a specific use, which is perimeter security, and prove out how that extends to different use cases, as well as just the methodology in general being a great way to apply a standard, to really scale these programs predictably into the future of the technology.
For sure. Well, congratulations to you and the Thread team on that award.
Thanks, Danielle.
For sure. We're coming near the end of our time here, Gray. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
No, I appreciate your time. I appreciate, all our industry partners, certainly the Grand Forks Air Force Base, for working with us. And it's, I think our approach is compelling, at least to those of us that decided to do a career change and work on this mission. And I truly believe we have, an approach that is the way to scale these. And there's no coincidence that drones have been, let's call it, in vogue for a while now, and we really haven't seen many, if any, scale deployments from a asset inspection or really embedding these tools into an enterprise that's truly integrated like any other system of record in producing operational data and making use of operational data. From that perspective, we've seen scaled deployments. We see, kind of working with folks what the challenges are, and we think we have a really good approach to solve those challenges. So I'd encourage those interested or compelled by the vision to reach out or visit our website, thread.one. And we'd love to hear from you. And love collaborating with the industry and hearing what other folks are up to. So I appreciate the ecosystem and certainly the channel to express what we're doing.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Again, we are joined by Gray Byers, Chief Business Officer at Thread. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please contact UAS Magazine. We hope that you enjoyed this episode and we look forward to next time. Until then.